Hello there, I'm Luke Chambers and welcome to a special edition video for UX Mastery Book Club. I'm humbled and excited to be joined today by Don Norman, widely regarded for his expertise in the fields of design, usability engineering, cognitive science, for being a prolific advocate for human-centered design, for his gentle humour and for the inspiration and orientation he provides for designers. With a rich and varied career and amongst his many other roles, which make it difficult to do justice with only a short introduction, Don is currently the director of the Design Lab at the University of California, San Diego, and co-founder and consultant with the Nielsen Norman Group. He's here to chat with us about his seminal book on design and our current book club focus, the book with the masochistic teapot cover, The Design of Everyday Things. Thank you so much, Don. Welcome to our book club. How are you?
Thank you. But hey, that's the old book.
It is. I'll show you an older one. Got the old one here.
The Psychology of Everyday Things.
Indeed.
So the newer version, though, the one published in 2013, does have new material and different examples.
Yes. Well, we've got a few questions about that. I know people are keen to know about that. We're joined in this hangout by a selection of UX Mastery Book Club members who all have some questions. Welcome to all of you too. We'll come back to you in a minute. But to begin, Don, the warmth and approachability in your writing are an inspiration to many of us who read your work. Can you start off today's discussion by telling us a little bit more about what's behind your excitement and advocacy for human-centered design and how that sort of feeds into your process and thinking and indeed emotion when you're writing?
So I started off as a geek. I was an electrical engineer, got 2 degrees in electrical engineering, and firmly believed that, you know, if only people would get out of the way, our stuff would work much better. Then by a freak accident, actually most of my life has been accidental, and what I've learned to do is take advantage of these accidents and go into whole new fields and explore new territory. So by a freak accident, I got attracted by the newly revived psychology department in Pennsylvania, where the new chair was a physicist, and they were hiring people who had no background really in psychology. And so I went and talked to the chair, who said, "You don't know anything about psychology, wonderful." And so I joined the psychology department and brought in information processing to psychology, which was really quite foreign in those days. And after I graduated, my first job was at Harvard, where George Miller had set up something called the Center for Cognitive Studies. And I didn't even know what the word cognitive meant. And my real education in psychology came when I was at the center at Harvard. After a short stint there, I went to the newly founded university at San Diego, University of California, San Diego. Got there before any students had graduated. So it was just populated by very senior professors and a few Nobel laureates and graduate students. And over the years, I worked in the psychology department doing things in memory and learning and attention and how people do actions. And I got actually quite interested in human error, the kinds of errors that we make. And that got me called in to investigate our major nuclear power accident, the 3 Mile Island accident. And there I discovered, with a bunch of other people who were part of this committee, we were trying to determine why the operators had made their errors that they did. And we decided the operators were really quite intelligent and sensible, and everything they did was sensible, except the design was so bad that if you wanted to cause people to make errors, you couldn't have done a better job. I mean, 4,000 meters and controls laid out in a neat, orderly way so that you might have a bank of 20 switches. And then if you flipped one in the middle wrong, people got mad at you. Yeah. So that made me realize that this background I had in both engineering and psychology was really a good combination to look at real human behavior. And that's where I started. First of all, working with NASA in aviation safety, and then consulting with the newly developing computer industry. I did a lot of work with what was called Xerox PARC in those days, the Palo Alto Research Center, and also with Apple. And as I did more and more of that, I got more and more interested in the activity going on in Silicon Valley. And so I retired from the university. I retired in 1993 and went up to Apple and became, well, eventually a vice president of the Advanced Technology Group. And that's where I realized many different things. One of them was the difference between what academics know and what practitioners know, and the difference in how academics do things and practitioners. So the joke I like to tell you is that in academia, there's a lot of deep thinking, very little doing. And in industry, there's a tremendous amount of doing and very little thinking. And so it's actually useful to go back and forth, because the reason you don't do much thinking in industry is not because the people can't do it. They're very bright. They're really good people, but there's no time. Everything is a rush. No matter what you're doing, there's a rush. There's a competitive rush. There's a rush to get out in time for a Christmas break or get time for New Year's or for the start of school or whatever. And it takes 2 or 3 years to do a major project. And even so, it's always a rush. In fact, in the new edition of Design of Everyday Things, because the old edition was written before I got to Apple many years ago. And so now 25 years later, I've learned a lot. So the fundamental principles haven't changed, but I was able to update the examples, which were out of date, and put it in 2 new chapters about life in the real world. And I explained the design process and how we first try to make sure we solve the right problem and do design research. And then we do rapid prototyping and we test and so on. Well, when you actually come to do it in a team, in a product team, you're not allowed to. And here's what happens. The person says, yes, what you're saying, the person in charge, the product manager, what you're saying you should do is absolutely the correct way to do it. But we're really sorry, but we just don't have time. This right now. So next time we'll do it right. There is no next time. And so I invented Don Norman's law, which says that the day the product team is put together, it's over its budget and it's behind schedule. So that's in sort of a nutshell how I arrived at where I am. So I really like working in industry and working in academics and going back and forth. And when I was pulled out of my second retirement to start this new design lab, I decided, first of all, I would not work in a department or a school. I would work across the entire university. And second of all, I would work closely with a lot of industry so that we would work on real problems instead of the toy problems that most academic work is about. Yeah. And so that's getting off to a nice start. So that's the beginning.
Very good. Stephanie had a question about if you could go back and change the book. So just following on from what you were saying there, is there anything, I mean, you had the 2013 edition, we're coming up to 30 years next year. Is there anything about the way that design's changed recently that you might consider including additional material for?
Not really. Design is undergoing some rapid change. And my book is primarily concerned with the physical components and the way we interact with products. So there's very little about services and also very little about the kind of work that I'm actually doing in the design lab. So in the design lab, we decided that we would not start a traditional design department and make traditional products or even traditional services, because I thought, you know, there's lots of really good design schools all around the world. And we don't really need another one. What we decided to do is we're going to work on complex problems, systems, complex socio-technical systems. So we're working in education, where we're trying to do self-taught. So if you need something, you just go and find on the internet the course and take it. And that will really change education a lot. Instead of going to college for 4 years and then graduate school for another 2 or so on. I guess in the British, it's go to college for 3 years and then 2 years for a master's. And that's supposed to last you the rest of your life? Nah. So a lot of us are even thinking, why even get a degree at all? Why don't you just take the courses that have the knowledge that you need at the moment And then as you learn and need more knowledge, take those courses. And all the general purpose knowledges like philosophy and history and other things, literature, if they bore you, don't take them. Because as you mature, guess what? You'll discover, oh, the history is fascinating, or the philosophical basis is fascinating. And then you go off and learn it. And if you learn it when you really want to, you'll learn it so much better. It will matter a lot more. So we're doing that, and we're doing healthcare, which is a mess because it was monstrous and it was never designed, and it ends up with 20, 30, 50 different specialties, and a patient goes from one specialist to the next, and information is lost all along the way. Medical error is thought of as one of the top 3 causes of death. That's crazy. And we're looking at other things as well, the role of automation and how people interact with automation. So that, though, some of the stuff that we do there fits into the last couple chapters of the book. Actually, it fits into all of the book. But to treat it properly requires its own book. And I may yet do that.
So you mentioned that, with a field that is changing so rapidly, people can do their own learning online, do their own short courses, take things as interest them. Are there things that you think that in the speed and sort of haste of all of that might get overlooked, the sort of the nuanced things that design students should really learn, but they wouldn't of their own initiative, that they might miss out on if they just did their own sort of self-guided learning?
Well, again, when we say design students, we have to talk about what kind of students. Traditional design students come in art and architecture schools, and they basically learn the craft. And I think that the work that's done by these types of designers is wonderful and beautiful, and it makes my life better. And I'm really delighted I buy these products. The kinds of problems I'm talking about, though, require a very different kind of training. We have to know more about the world, and about organization, and about politics. Why does a designer have to know about politics? Well, when you're talking about complex endeavors, trying to restructure education or healthcare or transportation, they affect a large numbers of people. And therefore, if it's a big project, no matter what you suggest, people will object. And you have to figure out some careful path through all these objections to get anything done. And that's what politics is about. The good side of politics, it's the art of compromise. When people with honest differences of opinion meet and then try to figure out a way out of, a compromise that satisfies as many as possible. The bad part of politics is when they refuse to discuss other alternatives, or when it's driven by greed or profit. But we have to deal with all of this, because in the real world, if I want to change the transportation system or education system, it's amazing how many people will come out objecting. So we need to learn how to deal with that, and how to divide the problem up into small, little, meaningful parts that we can actually do without too much objection. So instead of doing one large solution, we do many tiny steps.
That's a good segue into some of these questions that our Hangout participants have. Dan, you had a really interesting question about sort of checklists, about things to do and not to do. Did you want to ask Don that question?
That's funny. Yeah, it was an older question, but I'll take it anyways. Don, I was essentially asking what a version of what Luke just asked, which was, do you think that there's something lost from like lists of do's and don'ts online? And do you think that they're neglecting a problem to solve or context at all?
Yep. Yes.
Good.
I mean, I can say more, but yeah, I mean, come on. Anytime there's a list of do's and don'ts, it's oversimplified. And in fact, anytime you have a list of fundamental principles, I have a list of fundamental principles, but you have to be careful. They often conflict with each other. I want it to be as easy and simple as possible, but I also want to do the things that fit people's real needs, and people's real needs are not simple. And so the real question then is not how do I balance that, but how do I fulfill the needs, but make it still understandable. I mean, one of my pet peeves is these devices And I blame actually Johnny Ive, the lead designer at Apple, who's a brilliant industrial designer, but taught as a craftsperson. So his stuff is beautiful. He loves his videos always talk about how he could machine the metal. So look, the body is one piece of metal, and the way it feels and the way it looks and the rounded corners and the lack of seams. Wonderful. But he's completely ignorant about how people interact with these devices. And so the modern iPhone is getting to be more and more difficult to use. You may not agree, but just think about how many times you're not sure whether you should tap once or twice or 3 times, or a long tap or a short tap, or with 1 finger, 2 fingers, or 3 fingers, whether you swipe up or down or left or right. There's no way of knowing. The fundamental principle of discoverability has been lost, even though Apple was one of the companies that invented that principle. We don't get feedback. How many times did you take your phone and you flip through and find a photo you want to show somebody, you give it to somebody else, and they touch the screen and so it's lost. There's no way to go back. You have to start all over again. And I hate it when I give a talk and people want to take pictures of me. When they have a camera, it's wonderful. They take the camera out and go, look. When they have a cell phone, they give it to somebody else to take the picture, and the other person touches the wrong thing and loses the camera, and it goes back and forth and back and forth. And so what ought to be a 5-second job is a minute job. And when there are 20 people in line, that's a lot of time.
A lot of the language around usability and human-centered design contains assumptions that simplicity is the ideal goal for a designer. Is this?
Well, I have a book that says just the opposite.
Can life be richer and more rewarding when we include nuance? Yeah.
Yeah, because people don't want simplicity. They claim they do, but they really don't. What they want is to understand. Because if you give somebody something that they can understand, they say, see how simple it is? And if you make it simple, there's just one button. Okay, but how many things does it do? It does 20 things? So how do you make one button do 20 things? It ends up looking simple, but it's incredibly complex to use. So people don't want simplicity, they want understanding.
Nayland, did you have a question for Don about pros and cons of being a UX unicorn?
Yeah. Don, so my question is, for a UX career, what are the pros and cons of being a UX unicorn versus specializing in a certain area on UX?
So what do you mean by unicorn?
What I meant was someone who's up to date and working professionally across from research to design to testing across the fields of UX, or like versus specializing in one area, maybe design or research, or maybe testing, or maybe interaction design, just one area.
I think the way we would form that question is whether you should be a specialist or be a generalist.
Yeah.
And the answer is, it's all up to you. That they're different. And some people just love learning more and more about the particular skills and particular focus of their work. And these people are very, very important. We need them. There are other people who just like like to work on different problems every time. So they know a little bit about lots of areas. And they're called upon, and usually you're suddenly thrown into a medical problem, or you're thrown into a transportation problem, or you're thrown into some banking problem. You don't know anything about it. And that's what makes it exciting, because you have to quickly learn. You have to find the experts, those other people, those specialists, and have them teach you and put it all together. And so you need a team of specialists and generalists. And I believe these are different kinds of people. And that it really has to be your choice as to which direction you just feel naturally inclined.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Aaron, did you have a question around strategies for convincing companies about the value of UX?
Your microphone is muted.
Yeah, sorry, let me unmute my microphone. My question was, do you have any specific analogies, descriptions, or strategies that you use to convince companies or departments that UX is worth their time and investment?
That's probably my most frequently asked question.
Oh, I was trying to be your least frequently asked question. I was trying to be original. Darn.
Nope. When you work in if you're in the university, you don't think of that question. When you work in a company, it comes up all the time. How do we demonstrate the value of our stuff to the higher level executives? And I believe that designers are their own worst enemy. Well, let's take a look at user-centered design or human-centered design. The fundamental principle is understand your customer. Understand who you're doing this for. So if you're working in a banking company and you're trying to do some new financial product, who is your customer?
Everyone. Pretty much.
Who is your most important customer?
Stakeholders? Not sure. I guess people that, if
your
it's
most important customer. Your
anyone
most important customer is your boss, or maybe your boss's boss.
Right.
And if you're working in a design firm, a design consultancy, your customer is your client. And the way I like to explain it to designers is your job is to get your client or your boss promoted. So what we say is learn and understand the customer and what they need. So why don't we understand better what your client needs or what your boss's boss needs? Not your boss. Your boss probably understands what you're doing. It's the boss of your boss or their boss. And in a company, mostly it's governed by, we have to stay alive. We have to make money. We need profits. Profits are not evil. There are such things as evil profits, but if you don't make money, the company goes out of business. So it doesn't matter how great the company. So what we have to do to convince management of our value is to talk to them in the language they understand, which is profits, margins, sales, decreased costs. When you talk to the marketing people, when they say, we must add these 3 features to the product, how do they convince management? They don't talk much about the 3 features. They show a little spreadsheet, which they show, see, we add this, and here's the increased sales, and here's the increased profits. How do they know? When I tell designers about this, designers say, well, we don't know. How do we know those numbers? And I say, how do marketing people know? And the answer is they don't know. They make it up. They lie. And we can make things up and lie just as well as they can. But it's not quite that simple, because the executives that you're talking to, they've done this themselves. They know that you're making up the numbers. They also know that, however, there's no better way. And so you have to make it up in a very logical, sensible way that when they look them over, it feels reasonable. But that's the point. If you want to convince people in a company about your worth, you have to talk to them in what really matters to them, which is that increased sales, increased profits, decreased costs, less service calls. And you have to document that. What you should not do is say, we do beautiful work and the customers tell us how much they love it. Because what an executive will say is, of course you do. That's why we hired you. Now goodbye, I have to go back to work.
This is interesting conversation. We're talking about the potential for businesses to evil profits and using the power of business for good. Donna's asked a question. Donna's not here, but she asked a question. Are you familiar with transition design, which is a design approach to wicked problems that proposes design-led societal transition towards more sustainable futures? So it's kind of using, it's a field of human-centered design that's centered on solving the wicked problems of things like poverty and disease and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, it's interesting that we invent a new kind of design every couple of weeks. So no, I've never heard the term transactional design, but actually what I'm doing is just that. I'm working on wicked problems. And we're trying to figure out how to best do them. And we actually have a paper called Design X in the new journal SAGI, SAGJI. It's a journal, it's an excellent journal that comes from China, from Tongji University in Shanghai, China. But the articles are truly excellent. And I wrote a very large article called Design X with Peter Jan Stoppers, who's a friend who teaches at Delft in the Netherlands, about how one should approach these kinds of problems. And in fact, we were inspired by a story from the Royal College of Art, the joint program they have with Imperial College, that looked at the ambulance system in London. And they said it's really all backwards. So, you know, ambulances stay at the hospitals, and then when there's a call, they have to rush to where the injured person is and then rush them back to the hospital. Why don't the ambulances be where the injured people are? That is, they should be located throughout the city where we know there's apt to be difficulties, accidents, injuries. And then we'll be closer, we can pick them up and bring them back. And we should actually redesign the ambulances to have a better assortment of equipment and telecommunication gear, so the physicians back at the hospital know exactly what's happening and either can give us advice on the way in or are ready for us when we arrive. And so this was a very long project. They redesigned ambulances, they redesigned the structure, they redid the hospital systems, they won prizes for it. The mayor of London loved it. And they gave a talk on this at our Design X conference in Shanghai. And I said in the question period, well, that's really exciting. So now it's 10 years since that work was done. And so tell me how it's accepted by the city. And the answer is nothing ever happened. It was such a big problem that people loved it and people hated it. And the unions hated it. And everybody rose up in opposition and nothing happened. And that's what really led us to realize you have to do things in really small steps. The other thing that we're looking at is, we call it citizen science, or maybe citizen involvement. So a really good example, there are people all around the world, by the way, who when they have a problem, they start solving it themselves. I was just in Lisbon last week, and there's a wonderful group called Patient Innovations, where they help patients help themselves. So one of their favorite stories is a little boy who lost part of his arm in an accident. And people made fun of him, and he had clumsy prosthetics, but he realized he could make his own prosthetics. So actually, with some help, he redesigned an arm and 3D printed it and attached it to his arm. And now actually he says all his friends are jealous. They wish they could have such neat, colorful, wonderful arms. You can even change it, change the arm and you change your clothes and so on. And another story is diabetes. This will take too long to tell you, but diabetes problems have problems in which they have to always be measuring their blood sugar level, and then deciding whether they should get a squirt of insulin or take some candy, some sweet, some sugar. And to get what's called an artificial pancreas, that's basically a machine that does that automatically, we can do that. But to receive permission to build and sell that requires 5 or 6 years, as much as $1 billion of clinical testing. The Federal Drug Administration in the United States and the equivalent in the EU or in Britain they're very careful. But what happened was a bunch of people said, well, hell, we can do it ourselves. So they found a continuous glucose monitor and they took it apart and figured out how it worked and published it on the internet. So you could take those signals and send them out on the internet. You could look, see what your blood level was on your cell phone. And someone else did the same with an insulin pump. And then a group of people all got together and put together the software that couples the glucose meter with the insulin pump. And boom, they're wearing it. Some 200 people now have built their own insulin pump without a permission. And they're leading really great lives. And as a result, by the way, the medical profession is learning a tremendous amount about this. And one of the nice things that I like is that one of the companies, Dexcom, that made the continuous glucose monitor, when they discovered that this person had taken it apart and published how it worked on the internet, their response was, actually it was pretty neat, their response was to hire him and say, that's wonderful work, we want you to keep doing it. And so I think the fact that people can do their own work, and here's going to change design a lot, because there are new powerful design tools that don't take much skill to use or to learn. There are new powerful making tools like 3D printers and laser cutters. And 3D printers are changing dramatically. They're not just these little cheap things that dribble stuff on top, but there's laser sintering and there's other types of methods. And there are all sorts of fabrication methods that everyday people can learn to use and do wonderful things. But usually they're very crude and they don't work really well, but they show you the potential. And now the professional designer can come in and can work with the people and make things much more elegant and better and maybe less expensive. And you can make it, you can learn how to manufacture it in large numbers as opposed to the small ones. But working together with people is a whole new way of doing things.
Fantastic. We're about out of time, but one final question before you go, Don. What design or psychology books are on your bedside table at the moment?
None.
What
I am reading,
yeah.
I do a tremendous amount of reading, and I'm reading, first of all, history of technology is of great interest, and second of all, economic forecasts about what are we coming to, how is the world going to be changing. So most of my books are business models, and I'm very concerned about the rise of artificial intelligence, which, if done wrong, is going to replace us. And I'm working with people trying to say, look, these deep learning skills that are done by neural networks, they're really good at finding something, but we have no idea why or how. We can't ask them any questions. How do we change that? And so that's what I've been reading about and learning about and working with people who do it. And the citizen science movement. So there's a person at MIT, Eric von Hippel's done a lot of work on called lead user innovation. So I've been reading his works as well. But I also travel a lot. As I say, I was in Lisbon last week, and prior to that in Madeira, where there's this wonderful joint program between Madeira, University of Lisbon, and Carnegie Mellon University, and a few other universities actually. And we have a really good group of people looking at interesting problems in an island economy. Because Madeira is a really interesting place. It's a small island. It's Portuguese, but it's really off the coast of Africa. And there's a wonderful migratory fish pattern and climate pattern that can be studied there that will actually impact the whole world. So that's what I do in my spare time.
Fantastic. Let's wrap things up there. Thank you very much indeed. It's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you to everyone who asked questions. If you've been watching and still have some questions, please do join us to continue discussion.
I see you there, and there.
UX Mastery forums. We'll post a list for you, a link for you. And thank you to you, Don. Don is good. Thank you very much for taking time out from your busy schedule to share with us.
You're quite welcome. Thank you, everybody.
That's all for today. See you all next time.
Bye.